My father gave me a crumbling country estate, and my brother a luxury apartment in New York. When my mother saw the property, she told me I had 48 hours to hand the keys over so my brother could take over. But when my golden child brother arrived in his pickup truck to kick me out, his smug face went entirely pale at what he actually saw. My name is Caroline. I am 33 years old and my family just tried to steal my empire. The heavy slap of crumpled paper hitting the marble countertop echoed like a gunshot through the dusty grand foyer of the estate. I did not flinch. I slowly looked up from the massive architectural blueprints spread across the kitchen island to see my mother Patricia glaring at me. She wore a pristine white cashmere coat and diamond earrings that looked entirely absurd amidst the drywall dust exposed wooden beams and scaffolding of my ongoing renovation. Her lips were pressed into a thin, disdainful line, the exact same expression of profound disappointment she had worn every time she looked at me for the past 10 years. "Take a good look at that paper, Caroline," she snapped, stepping carefully around a stack of ceramic tiles as if they might infect her with poverty. "You have exactly 48 hours to pack up your brooms, your cheap clothes, and get out of this house." I calmly reached out and flattened the crumpled paper with the palm of my hand. It was a notice of eviction, completely baseless, holding absolutely zero legal weight, but dripping with my mother's usual staggering entitlement. I wiped a streak of white plaster dust off the sleeve of my tailored blazer and met her furious gaze. "I am not going anywhere, Mother," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of the emotional reaction she was so desperately trying to provoke. "The will was probated last month. Dad left this estate to me. It is legally mine." My mother let out a sharp, mocking laugh that bounced off the high vaulted ceilings of the foyer. "Your father was losing his mind at the end. That is the only logical explanation for why he would leave a massive historic piece of acreage to a college dropout. You have spent the last 3 years doing nothing but sweeping floors, breathing in sawdust, and pretending to be some sort of contractor. It is pathetic to watch." I felt a familiar bitter sting at the words college dropout, but I refused to let it break my composure. I did not drop out of my university because I failed my classes. I dropped out 10 years ago because my father had suffered a severe stroke and someone had to step in to run his struggling small property management office while he recovered. My mother was too busy attending country club charity luncheons to lift a finger, and my older brother Derek was too busy playing the big shot investor on Wall Street with the massive trust fund they had completely drained for his benefit. I sacrificed my education and my 20s to keep our family afloat, and my reward was being treated like the hired help ever since. "This property is a disaster," Patricia continued, waving her hand dismissively at the covered furniture and the temporary work lights hanging from the ceiling. "Derek actually needs this land for a real purpose. He is expanding his financial portfolio and requires a sprawling, secluded estate to build his new investment headquarters. He is a real businessman, Caroline. He deals in millions of dollars and high-profile clients. You just deal in dirt and debris. Do the right thing for once in your life, stop being so selfish, and step aside for your brother." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, genuinely amazed by her unwavering delusion. She truly believed I was just a sad lost girl playing with power tools in a ruined house. She had no idea that while Derek was allegedly making millions, I had spent the last decade quietly leveraging my father's small business into a massive operation, buying, restoring, and flipping high-end commercial real estate across the state. I did not just deal in dirt. I owned the very ground she was standing on and a dozen other properties just like it. "Derek already got the luxury penthouse in Manhattan when Dad passed," I replied smoothly, crossing my arms over my chest. "He can run his imaginary hedge fund from there. This estate is not for sale, and it certainly is not for surrender. If Derek wants a country headquarters, he can use his Wall Street millions to buy his own. Derek and Nia are leveraging that Manhattan penthouse to build a real legacy," Patricia retorted, her voice dripping with venom. "Your sister-in-law, Nia, has the sense to stand behind a successful man unlike you, who scares off every potential suitor with this obsessive need to play in the mud. Derek is building an empire. My mother stepped closer, ignoring the dust that brushed against her expensive coat. Her eyes flashed with a predatory, calculating gleam that I recognized instantly. She had come prepared for a fight. "I was hoping you would be stubborn," she whispered, reaching into her designer handbag, "because it makes this next part so much more satisfying for me." She pulled out a crisp, official-looking manila folder and slammed it down right on top of my carefully drawn blueprints. "You thought you were so smart hiding away in this rural dump thinking you had finally won something," she sneered, leaning over the counter so her face was inches from mine. "But you forgot one tiny, crucial detail about inheriting a commercial property of this size: the taxes. That is an official notice from the State Revenue Department. You owe a $250,000 inheritance tax lien on this land, and the final non-negotiable deadline is tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock." I stared down at the thick folder, keeping my expression carefully neutral. I did not reach for it. "You do not have a fraction of that kind of money, Caroline." My mother smiled, a cold, victorious expression spreading across her face. "But Derek does. He is going down to the county clerk tomorrow morning, the second the doors open, to pay the lien in full. And when he does, the state will automatically transfer the deed of this property directly to him. It is perfectly legal. So like I said, you have exactly 48 hours before my son comes here to claim what is rightfully his. Pack your bags." She turned on her heel and marched out of the foyer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind her with a resounding thud. I stood alone in the quiet dust of the foyer for a long moment. I did not panic. I did not cry. I did not feel the familiar crush of inadequacy that used to paralyze me when I was younger. Instead, I simply reached into the pocket of my blazer, pulled out my phone, and dialed my lawyer, Donovan. Donovan answered on the first ring, his voice brisk and professional. "Are they taking the bait?" "They took it completely," I said, a genuine, dangerous smile finally breaking across my face in the empty room. "My brother is coming to claim the property in 2 days. Activate Phase 2. Let us give them a homecoming they will never forget." Exactly 48 hours later, the crunch of heavy tires on gravel echoed up the main driveway. I stood on the sweeping front steps of the main lodge, a cup of coffee in my hand, watching an oversized, pristine black pickup truck aggressively navigate the winding road. It was exactly the kind of truck bought by a Wall Street guy trying to project a rugged masculine image he had not actually earned. The truck slammed to a halt right in front of the main gates. The driver door swung open, and my brother Derek hopped out. He was dressed in a tailored suit, paired with expensive boots, looking incredibly smug. The passenger door opened a second later, and his wife Nia stepped out. Nia was a striking African-American woman with a razor-sharp intellect, wearing a flawless emerald green designer suit. She possessed a formidable, commanding presence and had always carried herself with absolute authority. Usually, Nia was fiercely calculating, but today she wore the same entitled smirk as my brother. They had come to claim their prize. Derek marched up to the rusty temporary iron construction gates, fully expecting to look past them and see the crumbling, dilapidated country house my mother had described. He pulled a heavy pair of bolt cutters from the bed of his truck, ready to forcefully snap the lock and evict me from the premises. But I pressed a button on the remote in my pocket. The heavy iron gates smoothly slid open on their automated tracks, revealing the truth my mother had completely missed during her visit. Derek dropped the bolt cutters. The heavy metal clattered against the pavement. His jaw went completely slack. The smug grin slid right off Nia's face, replaced by absolute stunned silence. They were not staring at a ruined estate. They were staring at the Oak Haven retreat. Before them stood a sprawling, ultra-luxury commercial wellness resort that was practically complete. The old country house had been masterfully restored and expanded into a stunning reception lodge with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the valley. A terraced infinity pool gleamed in the morning sun, surrounded by private spa pavilions, immaculate landscaping, and a fleet of high-end luxury cars belonging to my private investors and contractors. It did not look like a dusty construction site anymore. It looked exactly like what it was: a $15 million commercial property preparing for its grand opening. "What is this?" Derek stammered, his eyes darting frantically across the massive glass pavilions and the expensive stonework. "Where did all this come from?" "It came from me," I said, walking slowly down the front steps to meet them at the gate. "I spent the last 3 years securing commercial loans, negotiating with contractors, and designing every square inch of this property. Welcome to my business, Derek." Derek's initial shock quickly morphed into a furious, greedy entitlement. His face flushed dark red as he marched onto the property, gesturing wildly at the buildings. "You built a commercial resort on my land," he yelled, pointing a finger at my chest. "You are out of your mind, Caroline. But thank you for doing all the heavy lifting. I am the primary heir to this family. Every piece of glass, every drop of water in that pool, and every single building on this acreage legally belongs to me now." Nia crossed her arms, stepping up right beside her husband and glaring at me with open disdain. Derek leveraged our New York penthouse to fund his new investment firm. We took on a massive financial risk. You think you can just steal his rightful inheritance to play pretend businesswoman and hoard the profits? She looked me up and down, her expression dripping with condescension. You did not even finish your sophomore year of college, Caroline. You have no idea how to manage a $15 million asset. Do not make this ugly. Hand over the keys. My husband needs this property to save his business, and we are legally taking it today. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch at the mention of my college education, which I had sacrificed so Derek could keep his Manhattan lifestyle funded. I simply reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a crisp official state document. "I believe you came here to pay an inheritance tax lien," I said smoothly, holding the document out to my brother. "You thought the state would automatically transfer the deed to you this morning? Because I supposedly could not afford the $250,000 bill." Derek snatched the paper from my hand, his eyes scanning the printed text. Nia leaned over his shoulder to read it, her flawless brow furrowing in confusion. "I paid the inheritance tax lien in full a month ago," I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the crisp morning air. "I paid it using the commercial revenue from my other real estate projects. You cannot swoop in and steal my property by paying a debt that no longer exists. The state recognizes me as the sole undisputed owner of the Oak Haven Retreat. You have zero legal claim to this land, Derek. Now get off my property before I have my security team escort you and your truck out of here." Nia looked at Derek, her sharp eyes narrowing as she realized her husband's brilliant legal loophole was entirely worthless. Derek stood frozen, staring at the zero balance on the tax receipt. The humiliation radiating from him was palpable. He had brought his wife here to show off his easy victory, only to be completely outsmarted by the sister he had spent his entire life looking down upon. But Derek had always been a sore loser, and his greed was far stronger than his shame. The redness in his face shifted from humiliation to pure, unadulterated malice. He slowly crumpled the tax receipt in his fist and threw it onto the pristine driveway. He pulled his smartphone from his suit pocket and glared at me, a malicious, ugly grin spreading across his face. "You think paying taxes makes you the owner, Caroline?" He sneered, unlocking his phone and dialing a number. "You think you can just outsmart me with a bank transfer? Let us see how successful your little luxury resort is when the city zoning commissioner hears about your forged building permits." Derek held his phone to his ear, his eyes locked on mine with a venomous glare. He spoke in hushed, urgent tones, using the kind of coded language prevalent among corrupt Wall Street brokers who thought they were untouchable. I simply stood my ground on the pristine gravel driveway of the Oak Haven Retreat, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. Nia watched me closely. I could see the gears turning behind her sharp eyes. She was a highly intelligent African-American woman who had navigated the treacherous corporate ladders of New York, and she possessed a flawless radar for identifying when a situation was a setup. She was already calculating why I was not reacting with blind panic, but Derek was too blinded by his own towering ego to notice my calm demeanor. Less than 2 hours later, the screech of heavy brakes signaled the arrival of a white city vehicle. The dust had barely settled when a heavy-set man in a rumpled gray suit stepped out. He carried a scuffed leather briefcase and an air of unearned, aggressive authority. He completely ignored me, walking straight over to my brother and shaking his hand like they were old fraternity buddies. This was Inspector Higgins, a notoriously corrupt official from the county zoning board. Derek had likely promised him a massive illegal kickback from the resort's future revenues to fabricate a major violation today. Higgins marched up to the front entrance of my magnificent glass reception lodge. Without conducting a single measurement, reviewing a single site plan, or asking for a single document, he pulled a massive bright red stop work order sticker from his briefcase and slapped it directly onto the custom glass door. "These commercial zoning permits are entirely fraudulent," Higgins announced loudly, making sure every construction worker and landscaper on the property could hear him. "This land is zoned for residential agriculture. You are building a commercial hospitality structure illegally. I am shutting this entire operation down immediately. Every contractor needs to vacate the premises right now." My site foreman, a burly man who had worked with me for 3 years, marched over, his face flushed with protective anger. He knew our commercial permits were absolutely flawless. He looked at me, waiting for the signal to fight back, ready to call the police to remove the inspector. But I gave him a subtle, firm shake of my head. I told him to pack up the crew, secure the heavy equipment, and send everyone home for the day with full pay. Within 20 minutes, the property was filled with the chaotic sounds of heavy machinery powering down, metal toolboxes slamming shut, and dozens of pickup trucks rolling down the driveway. I stood silently and watched my entire workforce leave my property. Derek puffed out his chest, completely energized by the destruction of my momentum. He wrapped his arm around Nia's waist, pulling her close as if to show off his absolute dominance over my life and my business. Just as the last contractor truck disappeared down the road, a sleek silver Mercedes glided through the open iron gates. The driver door opened and my mother Patricia stepped out. She took one look at the bright red stop work order on the glass doors, surveyed the empty, silent property, and a triumphant, wicked smile spread across her face. She strutted over to me, casually adjusting her expensive diamond necklace. "I warned you, Caroline," Patricia said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "You always were too stubborn for your own good. You tried to play a high-stakes game and you failed miserably. But we are your family, and we are willing to save you from complete financial ruin." She gestured toward Derek, her golden child, with absolute reverence. "Sign over 80% of the LLC to your brother right now, and he will make the inspector go away," Patricia demanded, crossing her arms. "You can stay on as a glorified manager. You can greet the wealthy guests and arrange the flower vases in the lobby. But it is a man's job to run a multi-million-dollar commercial resort anyway. Derek has the financial acumen to salvage this mess. Do not be ungrateful. Sign the corporate paperwork or you will lose every single penny you invested when the city seizes the land." I looked at my mother. The sheer audacity of her sexism and her blatant favoritism was staggering, but it was absolutely nothing new. She had forced me to drop out of college to run my father's failing business, just so Derek could use my tuition money to fund his reckless Wall Street lifestyle. She had always viewed me as a workhorse meant to pull the heavy plow while her golden son rode in the carriage. Nia stood slightly behind them, her eyes darting between my mother, Derek, and me. I could tell my complete lack of tears was starting to seriously unnerve her. She knew exactly how people reacted when they were losing a $15 million empire, and my reaction was entirely wrong. I did not scream, I did not beg, I did not fall to my knees and plead for my mother to love me. I simply reached into my tailored blazer pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed the direct private line to my lead corporate attorney and closest ally, Donovan. Donovan answered immediately. "Are we clear?" he asked, his voice sharp and ready for warfare. "We are clear," I replied smoothly, keeping my eyes locked on my brother's smug face. They brought the corrupt zoning inspector. "The red sticker is on the door. My crew has vacated the premises." Patricia scoffed, rolling her eyes at Nia. "Let her call her cheap little lawyers. No one can overturn a municipal zoning order in under 6 months. She will bleed out in legal fees before she ever opens those doors." Derek stepped forward, pointing aggressively at the gate. "Get off my property, Caroline. I am chaining these gates shut and changing the locks. You are officially trespassing." I smiled, a slow, highly calculated expression that finally made Derek falter. I turned my back on my toxic family and began walking down the long gravel driveway toward my own car, leaving my beautiful resort behind without a single fight. Let them buy their cheap padlocks, I whispered into the phone, making sure my voice carried just enough for Donovan to hear, but keeping it hidden from the vultures celebrating behind me. Let them think they have successfully shut us down and cornered me. They do not know I secured federal landmark status for the entire acreage yesterday afternoon. That corrupt city inspector has absolutely zero jurisdiction here anymore. I walked away down the long gravel driveway of my $15 million resort. I did not look back. Behind me, Derek and my mother were already celebrating their imaginary victory. They were practically popping an invisible bottle of champagne, utterly oblivious to the federal trap I had just laid right under their feet. That evening, Derek decided to host a lavish victory dinner at the most exclusive steakhouse in the county to celebrate conquering his little sister. He invited my mother, demanding the best table in the house, and ordering the most expensive imported wines and premium cuts of beef to show off his absolute financial dominance. He wanted to revel in the feeling of being the wealthy, victorious patriarch of the family. Nia sat quietly beside him, sipping her sparkling water, her sharp eyes missing absolutely nothing. She was an intelligent, highly observant African-American woman who had clawed her way up the vicious corporate ladders of Manhattan. She knew what real wealth looked like, and she knew what a desperate facade looked like. When the check arrived, totaling nearly $2,000, Derek pulled out his heavy metal corporate credit card with a theatrical flourish. He dropped it onto the leather folio with a loud clack, grinning at my mother. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He was not smiling. He leaned down and whispered discreetly into my brother's ear. The heavy metal card had been declined. Derek laughed it off immediately, his face flushing a bright defensive red. He loudly blamed it on a fraud alert trigger from traveling outside of the city. He pulled out a second premium credit card from his designer wallet and handed it over. The waiter returned a few minutes later looking incredibly uncomfortable. Declined. Derek's confident facade cracked. Sweating slightly under his collar, he pulled out a third card. Declined again. Nia felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. She watched her husband, the supposed titan of Wall Street, frantically shuffling through his wallet like a cornered animal, while his mother ultimately pulled out her own checkbook to cover the extravagant meal. Patricia tried to play it off as a mother treating her successful son, but the humiliation hanging over the table was thick and undeniable. The moment they stepped out of the restaurant into the crisp evening air, Nia stopped on the sidewalk. She crossed her arms, her emerald suit catching the glow of the streetlights, and demanded to know exactly what was going on with their corporate accounts. Derek immediately deflected, stuttering about tied-up capital, delayed wire transfers, and aggressive market fluctuations. But Patricia instantly stepped in to shield her golden boy, turning her venom entirely on me despite my physical absence. "Do not badger your husband in public," Nia, my mother, snapped, adjusting her expensive fur wrap and glaring at her daughter-in-law. "Derek is only illiquid right now because that selfish girl is hoarding his rightful inheritance. Caroline has been siphoning family resources for years just to play contractor in the dirt. Derek had to tie up all his available capital to fight her illegal squatting. Once he officially takes over the resort and liquidates her fraudulent assets, his accounts will be overflowing again. A good wife supports her husband during temporary cash flow issues. Do not embarrass him." Nia did not argue. She did not raise her voice on the street corner. She simply stared at her mother-in-law, her sharp, analytical mind piecing together a terrifying and ugly puzzle. While they were busy eating premium steak and making pathetic excuses, I was sitting in my dimly lit home office 50 miles away, staring at a wall of glowing computer monitors. My lawyer Donovan was on speakerphone. "The landmark status is officially logged with the Federal Registry." Donovan confirmed, his voice vibrating with strategic satisfaction. "The city inspector just received the legal notice. He is completely panicking because he knows he grossly overstepped his municipal jurisdiction on a federally protected site. He is trying to reach Derek, but Derek is sending him straight to voicemail." "Let him panic," I replied, my fingers flying across my mechanical keyboard. "We are moving to the next phase. Derek thinks he has me cornered with a fake zoning violation. He does not realize I am not fighting him for the property anymore. I am fighting for his entire financial existence. Through my anonymous corporate holding company, I had spent the last 6 months quietly tracking Derek's disastrous financial footprint across Wall Street. He had made a series of incredibly reckless, highly leveraged trades that had completely wiped out his investment firm. I hit the execute button on my keyboard, officially acquiring a massive bundle of his distressed commercial debt from a panicked hedge fund for pennies on the dollar. I was no longer just his younger sister. I was legally his largest financial creditor. The next morning, Naya woke up early in the luxury hotel suite Derek had rented for the weekend. Derek was still snoring loudly, completely exhausted from the stress of his credit card humiliation. Nia did not make a single sound. She quietly picked up his leather briefcase, the one he had strictly forbidden her from opening, and skillfully snapped the combination locks open. She dug through the disorganized stacks of fake business proposals and empty corporate ledgers. At the very bottom, hidden beneath a folder labeled with my resort's name, Nia found a thick stack of unopened mail forwarded from their New York address. She sliced open the top envelope. It was a certified letter bearing the official seal of a major national bank. Her breath hitched sharply in her throat. It was a final notice of foreclosure on their Manhattan penthouse. Derek had sworn to her that he had safely leveraged their home to fund a brilliant new tech startup. He had promised her they were building generational wealth for their young child. But the legal document in her trembling hands told the absolute undeniable truth. He had not leveraged anything. He had gambled their home away on terrible market positions and completely defaulted on the mortgage. They were effectively homeless. Nia stared at the sleeping form of her husband, a cold, terrifying realization washing over her. Derek was not a successful investor fighting for his rightful family inheritance. He was a desperate, entirely broke fraudster facing imminent federal scrutiny, and he was trying to steal his sister's $15 million resort solely to save himself from going to federal prison. Derek sat in the overly air-conditioned business center of the luxury hotel, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He stared at his laptop screen with the bloated satisfaction of a man who had just conquered the world. The forged power of attorney had worked flawlessly. The local judge, blinded by my late father's old reputation and a pile of fabricated legal jargon, had officially granted Derek full executive control over Oakhaven LLC. In Derek's greedy mind, he had just stolen a $15 million fully renovated commercial resort without spending a single dime of his own money. Patricia stood right behind his leather chair, massaging his shoulders. She was practically vibrating with maternal pride, praising his aggressive business instincts. She told him how proud his father would have been to see a real man take the helm of the family legacy. But their arrogant celebration lasted exactly 14 minutes. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, the stock market opened, and my carefully constructed financial guillotine dropped straight down on my brother's neck. Derek's cell phone rang. It was his primary broker from a high-tier Wall Street firm. Derek answered the call with a smug greeting, fully expecting to hear congratulations on his new asset acquisition. Instead, all the color instantly drained from his face. His jaw dropped. He stopped breathing. When Derek signed that court injunction to legally seize my company, he did not bother to read the deeply buried corporate liability clauses. I had anticipated his greed months ago. I had intentionally structured Oakhaven LLC as a subsidiary attached to a highly toxic short-term commercial debt package worth exactly $5 million. And by signing a document declaring himself the sole managing director with unrestricted financial control, Derek had bypassed the corporate veil. He had legally triggered a personal guarantee clause. That $5 million debt did not just transfer to him. It dropped directly onto his heavily monitored personal credit profile, instantly triggering a catastrophic margin call across all his existing brokerage accounts. The broker on the phone was not offering congratulations. He was screaming. He demanded immediate liquid capital to cover the massive deficit. Derek's accounts were already frozen, drained dry by the disastrous, highly leveraged gambles he had made months prior. The very same gambles that had cost him his Manhattan penthouse. Derek dropped the phone onto the desk. His hands were visibly shaking. Patricia leaned over her, smile faltering as she looked at the computer screen. The financial dashboard that was supposed to display $15 million in fresh equity was flashing neon red. A massive negative balance glared back at them. "What is happening?" Patricia demanded, her voice shrill with sudden panic. "Tell them there is a mistake. You own the resort now. Tell the bank you have a $15 million asset." "I do not have the cash," Derek gasped, his chest heaving as he frantically clicked through his empty accounts. "They are calling in my margins. If I do not wire them $5 million by the end of the week, they are going to liquidate my entire portfolio and trigger a federal audit. Mom, if the feds look at my books, they are going to see the money I lost. They are going to see the wire fraud. I am going to federal prison." Standing in the doorway of the business center, completely unnoticed by her panicking husband and mother-in-law, stood Naya. Her flawless emerald suit was immaculate, but her eyes were cold and calculating. She reached into her designer handbag and felt the rough paper of the foreclosure notice she had intercepted the day before. She watched Derek sweating and hyperventilating. Naya was a fiercely intelligent African-American woman who had spent years navigating brutal corporate environments. She knew exactly what a sinking ship looked like. Derek was a total fraud, and he was about to drag her and their child down into a federal indictment. She quietly stepped back into the hallway, her mind rapidly formulating an exit strategy. Inside the room, Patricia had always been a master of ruthless survival. She grabbed Derek by the shoulders and shook him hard. "Stop crying like a child!" She snapped, her eyes wild with desperate calculation. "You legally own the resort. The judge gave you the authority to liquidate assets. We just need to sell it. We sell the entire property right now, pay off your $5 million debt, and you walk away with $10 million in pure profit. We just need a buyer who can close immediately." Derek wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He knew traditional commercial real estate deals took months of due diligence inspections and escrow holding periods. He did not have months. He had days. He needed a buyer with bottomless pockets, someone who could wire millions of dollars across state lines without asking too many questions. He opened his internet browser and frantically searched for nationwide corporate hospitality conglomerates. His eyes landed on a massive, aggressive acquisition firm known for snatching up premium wellness resorts in all-cash deals. Apex Hospitality. Derek dialed the corporate acquisitions number listed on their sleek, intimidating website. He put on his best, most arrogant Wall Street voice, desperately trying to mask the absolute terror shaking his vocal cords. He pitched the Oak Haven Retreat as a prime turnkey luxury asset. He lied through his teeth, claiming he was liquidating a family holding to free up capital for a larger venture, and offered them a steeply discounted price of $20 million if they could execute an all-cash wire transfer within 48 hours. He was put on hold. The agonizing elevator music played for what felt like an eternity. Patricia paced the floor behind him, biting her manicured nails. Finally, the line clicked back over. A smooth, professional voice belonging to the Apex Acquisitions Director came through the speaker. "Sir," the voice said, sounding entirely unbothered by the rushed timeline, "our board has reviewed the preliminary satellite imagery and the deed you forwarded. We are highly interested in acquiring the Oak Haven Retreat. We are prepared to meet your $20 million asking price and can expedite the wire transfer to satisfy your immediate capital requirements." Derek let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. He looked up at Patricia, who closed her eyes and pressed a hand to her chest, thanking her lucky stars that her perfect son was saved. However, the director continued, his tone turning strict and non-negotiable. "Due to the accelerated nature of this transaction and the immense volume of capital being wired, our corporate policy prohibits remote closings. We require the final transfer documents to be signed in person. We need you to come to our central headquarters tomorrow morning to execute the final signature." Derek nodded eagerly, desperate to agree to anything that would save him from federal prison. "Absolutely. I will fly out tonight." "Where are your headquarters?" the director replied with a crisp, chilling precision. "We are located in the financial district of Manhattan. We will expect you and your legal representation at 9 o'clock sharp." Do not be late. Derek hung up the phone in the hotel business center, wiping a thick layer of cold sweat from his forehead. He turned to my mother and painted an absolute masterpiece of a lie. He puffed out his chest and told her the $20 million cash deal with Apex Hospitality was fully secured. He claimed his brilliant negotiation skills had saved the family legacy and that they were going to be filthy rich by tomorrow afternoon. Patricia practically wept with joy. She praised his aggressive business instincts, completely oblivious to the fact that her golden child was currently standing on the edge of a federal indictment. To celebrate his imaginary victory, Derek insisted on taking my mother and Nia to the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant in the county for dinner. He needed to keep up the illusion of immense wealth, ignoring the fact that he was currently drowning in $5 million of toxic commercial debt. Nia played her part perfectly. She wore her emerald green suit, linked her arm through her husband's, and smiled a razor-thin, completely hollow smile. But beneath her calm exterior, her sharp mind was moving at light speed. She had the foreclosure notice on their Manhattan penthouse safely tucked inside her designer purse. She knew Derek was a desperate broke fraudster. She refused to let her young daughter go down with his sinking ship. I knew exactly where they were dining. Through my anonymous holding company, I had placed a monitoring alert on the toxic debt package Derek had blindly assumed. I was tracking every single panicked financial move he made. I drove to the restaurant and took a seat at the dimly lit mahogany bar near the back, ordering a glass of sparkling water. I wanted to watch my brother sweat through his celebratory dinner. About 40 minutes into their meal, Nia stood up from the table, excusing herself. As she walked across the main dining room, her eyes scanned the shadows of the bar. She spotted me immediately. We did not exchange a single word. Nia gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. I waited exactly 2 minutes before standing up and following her. I pushed open the heavy oak door of the upscale women's restroom. The space was lined with white marble and gold fixtures, smelling faintly of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. Nia was standing by the sinks washing her hands. The moment the door closed behind me, the polite, supportive wife facade vanished completely. Nia reached over and slid the deadbolt on the main restroom door, locking us inside. She turned to face me, her posture rigid and her eyes blazing with fierce protective maternal energy. Two highly intelligent women sizing each other up in the quiet glaring light of the vanity mirrors. "I know exactly what you are doing, Caroline." Nia stated, her voice low and dangerously sharp. "You are not a college dropout struggling to run a country resort. You are a corporate shark. You orchestrated that margin call today. You set a trap and my idiot husband walked right into it." I leaned against the marble counter, crossing my arms. I did not bother denying it. Derek tried to steal my property to cover his own failures. I am simply holding him accountable. Nia reached into her purse and pulled out the crumpled foreclosure notice, slapping it down on the counter between us. "He lied to me," she said, her voice shaking slightly with suppressed rage. "He told me he leveraged our penthouse for a brilliant new tech startup. He actually gambled our home away on terrible market positions. We are completely broke. He is trying to sell your resort to Apex Hospitality to save himself from going to federal prison." I looked at the foreclosure notice, then back at Nia. I respected her pragmatism. She was not crying over a broken heart. She was angry about a broken contract. "What do you want, Nia?" I asked calmly. "I want a guarantee," she demanded, stepping closer. "I am a mother first. I refuse to let my daughter grow up visiting her father in a federal penitentiary while we live in a homeless shelter. I will not allow Derek's criminal stupidity to ruin my child's future." "What kind of guarantee?" I asked. "An educational trust fund for your niece," Nia stated firmly. "Fully funded, legally locked, and completely untouchable by Derek, my mother-in-law, or the state government. You guarantee her financial security and her college tuition. You put it in writing. And in exchange, I will hand you the exact bullet you need to put right through Derek's forehead." I studied her face. Nia was offering a hostage exchange, and she held a piece of leverage I desperately wanted. "I agree to your terms," I said smoothly. "The trust will be drafted and funded by tomorrow morning. What do you have for me?" Nia let out a sharp breath, the tension leaving her shoulders. I know the power of attorney. He used to seize your LLC as forged, she said, leaning in close. He did not find a lost document in your father's old files. I saw him trace your father's signature. My eyes narrowed. Seeing it is not enough to prove it in a court of law, Nia. It becomes a he said, she said situation, and Patricia will lie under oath to protect him. Nia smiled, a cold and ruthless expression that matched my own. She opened her designer purse again and pulled out a small silver USB drive. Holding it up in the harsh bathroom light, she handed it to me. He was so incredibly proud of his own brilliance, Nia whispered. He sat at our kitchen island in New York and practiced tracing your father's signature for 3 hours. He thought he was alone in the apartment. He did not know I had recently set up a hidden nanny camera in the kitchen to monitor our new babysitter. The camera caught everything in high-definition video, his face, his hands, and the forgery. I took the silver USB drive from her hand, feeling the cold metal against my palm. It was the ultimate, irrefutable evidence. Derek had just sealed his own fate, and his own wife had delivered the execution order. Just as my fingers closed securely around the drive, the heavy brass handle of the restroom door rattled violently. Someone pushed hard against the locked door, frustrated by the deadbolt. A second later, a loud, sharp knock echoed through the marble room. Nia, are you in there? Patricia's voice rang out from the hallway, muffled but unmistakable. Derek is ready to order dessert, and you are being incredibly rude by disappearing. Open this door right now. The heavy brass handle of the restroom door rattled violently. Patricia's voice echoed off the marble tiles, muffled but unmistakable through the thick wood. Nia, are you in there? My mother demanded, her tone sharp and impatient. Derek is ready to order dessert, and you are being incredibly rude by disappearing. Open this door right now. Nia and I locked eyes in the harsh, glaring light of the vanity mirrors. The raw, unfiltered intelligence in her gaze was striking. We both knew exactly what was at stake in this singular, precarious moment. If my mother walked into this upscale restroom and found us engaging in a quiet, civilized negotiation, the entire illusion would instantly shatter. Patricia would run straight back to the table and warn Derek. Derek would panic, the Apex hospitality deal would collapse, and he would never step foot inside my corporate headquarters tomorrow morning to sign those federal transfer documents. The trap would fail. Nia did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She grabbed the silver USB drive from her open palm and shoved it hard against my chest. Hide it, she mouthed silently, her eyes wide with urgency. I swiftly slipped the tiny digital drive into the hidden zipper compartment of my tailored leather handbag, snapping the brass clasp shut just as Nia reached out and forcefully twisted the deadbolt. The second the lock clicked open, Nia threw the heavy oak door wide and immediately escalated her voice to a shrill, hysterical volume that echoed straight down the restaurant corridor. "You are out of your mind, Caroline!" Nia screamed, her face contorting into a flawless mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. "You followed us here just to harass my husband. You are completely pathetic and desperate." Patricia stumbled backward as the door swung open, her eyes widening in sheer shock as she took in the scene. She saw her impeccably dressed daughter-in-law standing aggressively over me, her manicured finger pointed directly at my face like a loaded weapon. Nia leaned into the performance with the absolute skill of a seasoned stage actress. She stepped closer to me, her emerald green suit flashing under the lights, forcing me to back up against the marble sinks. "You are just jealous that Derek is the true heir to this family," Nia yelled, making sure her voice carried out into the hallway for maximum dramatic effect. "You tried to build your little resort, you tried to lock him out of his own property, and you failed miserably. My husband outsmarted you. He is 10 times the business person you will ever be, and you simply cannot stand the fact that you lost." I played my part instantly. I let my shoulders drop, arranging my features into a mask of a defensive, heavily bruised ego. I took a step back, pretending to be cornered, humiliated and emotionally reactive. "It is my property," I snapped back, keeping my voice shaky, loud and resentful. "You and your husband are nothing but leeches. You stole my company with a fake court order." Patricia completely bought the act. A massive, triumphant smile spread across her face as she stepped into the restroom, placing herself firmly between Nia and me. She puffed out her chest with ultimate maternal arrogance, absolutely thrilled to see me being verbally destroyed by her golden child's wife. "Do not waste your breath on a failure, Nia," my mother sneered, looking me up and down with absolute withering disgust. "Look at you, Caroline, following us into a high-end restaurant just to hide in a bathroom and beg for scraps. It is pathetic. Derek won. The resort is legally his now. You played your little construction games and you lost everything. Accept your total defeat and go back to sweeping floors where you belong." Nia let out a loud, dramatic scoff, crossing her arms and turning her nose up at me. "Let us go back to the table, Patricia. The air in here is suddenly suffocating." My mother patted Nia's arm affectionately, throwing one last look of sheer contempt in my direction. They turned their backs on me and marched out of the restroom, their heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. I stood alone in the quiet marble restroom as the heavy door swung shut. I walked over to the gold-plated sink, turned on the cold water, and slowly washed my hands. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The defensive, bruised expression vanished entirely. A cold, highly dangerous smirk formed on my lips. I reached to the outside of my designer bag, tracing the outline of the hidden zipper compartment where the USB drive lay securely tucked away. The execution order was officially signed and delivered. Out in the main dining room, the atmosphere was entirely different. Nia and Patricia returned to their premium corner table. Nia immediately smoothed out her features, replacing her staged fury with a composed, supportive smile as she sat down next to Derek. Patricia was practically glowing with mean-spirited joy, leaning over the white linen tablecloth to tell Derek how Nia had just verbally annihilated his bitter sister in the restroom. Just as Derek opened his mouth to laugh, his cell phone lit up on the table. The caller ID displayed the corporate acquisitions number for Apex Hospitality. Derek snatched the phone up, his hands trembling slightly with a chaotic mix of adrenaline and deep financial desperation. He answered the call, his voice dripping with forced corporate bravado, desperately trying to mask the fact that his entire net worth was currently a massive negative number. He listened intently for 30 seconds. The color rushed back into his face. A massive, greedy, utterly blind smile stretched from ear to ear. He disconnected the call and slammed the phone down on the table, looking at his mother and his wife with wild, victorious eyes. "Mom." Derek said, his voice breathless and ecstatic. "Apex Hospitality just sent the preliminary wire agreement to my email. Their corporate legal team reviewed the power of attorney and approved the asset transfer. The $20 million is fully locked in. We are going to be multi-millionaires by Friday afternoon, and Caroline gets absolutely nothing." Patricia gasped with delight, reaching across the table to squeeze his hands. Nia took a slow sip of her sparkling water, keeping her face perfectly blank. Derek had no idea that the email he had just received was the final piece of bait. By accepting that wire agreement and preparing to sign it, using a forged document across state lines tomorrow morning, he was not securing a fortune. He was solidifying his own federal indictment. The decoy fight had worked perfectly, and the golden boy was marching happily toward his own destruction. Derek stared at his glowing smartphone screen with his eyes wide, captivated by an intoxicating mix of pure greed and sheer desperate relief. The email from the Apex Hospitality Acquisitions team was the financial lifeline he so desperately needed. I watched from the dark shadows of the restaurant bar as my mother Patricia reached across the white linen tablecloth to squeeze his hand. Her face was beaming with an arrogant maternal pride that she had never once directed toward me. Nia sat silently next to him, taking a slow sip of her sparkling water and perfectly maintaining her facade of the supportive wife. Derek had no idea he was celebrating his own impending federal indictment. I paid for my sparkling water, slipped out the side door of the upscale restaurant, and drove straight to my corporate office to finalize the execution order. The next morning, the sun barely crested the horizon when I walked into the high-security conference room of my holding company. My lead attorney, Donovan, was already there, typing rapidly on his laptop. He looked up, his sharp eyes glinting with a predatory anticipation that perfectly matched my own. I placed my handbag on the table, unzipped the hidden compartment, and pulled out the silver USB drive Nia had given me in the restroom. I slid it across the polished mahogany table. Donovan plugged it into his secure terminal and opened the video file. We sat in silence and watched crystal-clear, high-definition footage of my brother sitting at his kitchen island in New York, painstakingly tracing my late father's signature onto a blank power of attorney document over and over again. "We have the irrefutable proof of the forgery," I said, smoothly pouring myself a cup of black coffee. "Now we need to make sure the crime sticks permanently. Has Apex Legal sent the preliminary wire transfer requirements?" Donovan nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I sent the email 10 minutes ago using the Apex proxy server. This is where we elevate the situation from a local family dispute to an inescapable federal nightmare." Donovan explained the legal trap with absolute chilling precision. Apex Hospitality was headquartered in New York. Derek was currently sitting in a luxury hotel suite across state lines in Connecticut. If Derek simply signed a forged document in person, it would be a local crime, a state-level civil dispute that his expensive defense attorneys could potentially drag out in county court for years. He could cry to a local judge, blame his mother, or claim it was a misunderstanding over family assets. But if Derek digitally transmitted a forged financial document across state lines to secure a $20 million corporate transaction, the legal jurisdiction instantly changed. "It becomes a federal felony," Donovan stated, his voice clinical and completely devoid of mercy. "Interstate wire fraud." The moment he hit send from that Connecticut Internet Protocol address to our New York corporate servers, he is committing a severe financial crime against the federal government. The FBI does not negotiate with local county zoning boards, Caroline. They do not care about your mother's country club reputation, and they certainly do not care about family drama. They only care about the digital timestamp and the unauthorized transfer of wealth across state borders. I took a seat at the head of the conference table, staring at the massive monitors displaying the dummy Apex legal portal. "Send him the final authorization forms," I commanded. "Let us see exactly how greedy my brother truly is." 50 miles away in his extravagant Connecticut hotel suite, Derek's laptop chimed loudly with an incoming urgent email. He practically spilled his room service coffee, rushing to open it. Patricia stood right over his shoulder, her eyes fixed eagerly on the bright screen. Nia sat on the sofa across the room, pretending to read a fashion magazine, but her entire body was coiled with intense, silent anticipation. She knew exactly what was in that email, and she knew the silver USB drive containing the video of her husband committing a felony was currently sitting in my secure hands. Derek read the email aloud. "The Apex Corporate Legal Department required an immediate digitally signed authorization of the power of attorney and the asset transfer agreement to initiate the $20 million cash wire prior to their in-person meeting later that morning." Derek hesitated for a fraction of a second. The legal jargon in the email was dense, intimidating, and explicitly stated that the signatory was transmitting sensitive financial data across state lines under the penalty of perjury. A tiny, long, dormant survival instinct in his brain tried to warn him that this was moving entirely too fast. His subconscious knew that signing a forged legal document and emailing it to a major national conglomerate was an incredibly dangerous move. But Patricia immediately scoffed at his brief hesitation. She placed her hands firmly on his shoulders, her voice dripping with a toxic, blinding encouragement. "Do not overthink it, Derek," my mother urged, leaning in close so her cheek brushed against his. "This is exactly how billion-dollar corporations operate. They move fast, and they expect you to keep up with them. Caroline tried to hoard this wealth for herself, but she failed because she does not have your intellect or your business acumen. This resort belongs to our family, and you are the head of this family now. The judge gave you the authority. Take what is yours, son. Claim your rightful legacy." Derek looked at the glowing screen. He thought about the massive margin call that was about to completely bankrupt him by the end of the week. He thought about the devastating foreclosure notice on his Manhattan penthouse that he was desperately trying to hide from his wife. He thought about the crushing, humiliating mountain of toxic debt that was suffocating him. He swallowed hard. His towering ego and his absolute financial desperation completely overrode his common sense. He attached the scanned digital copy of the forged power of attorney. He attached the signed $20 million transfer agreement. Nia watched him over the top edge of her magazine, holding her breath. Derek moved his mouse cursor over the bright blue send button. With a sharp, decisive click, he executed the command. Back in my office, a loud, distinct chime echoed from Donovan's computer speakers. A bright green notification box popped up on the center monitor. The digital packet had been officially received. A highly encrypted, unalterable federal timestamp locked the transmission into the New York server records forever. Donovan leaned back in his heavy leather chair and looked at me, a cold, victorious smile spreading across his face. "We have him," Donovan said quietly, closing his laptop. "The federal wire fraud is officially documented and locked." I stared at the unchangeable timestamp glowing on the screen. The trap was armed, the lock was sealed, and my golden child brother was officially a federal criminal. All that was left was to welcome him to my corporate headquarters. That evening, the sprawling grand ballroom of the prestigious Oakwood Country Club was bathed in the warm golden glow of massive crystal chandeliers. My mother, Patricia, had spared absolutely no expense to celebrate her golden child. She had booked the entire private dining wing on less than 12 hours' notice, calling in every social favor she possessed to gather our entire extended family for what she officially dubbed a succession dinner. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who had ignored me for the past decade were seated around long, lavishly decorated tables. They were drinking premium champagne and dining on butter-poached lobster, while Patricia held court at the head of the room. She was wearing a new diamond-encrusted gown she had undoubtedly purchased on credit earlier that afternoon. She was radiating the kind of toxic, triumphant energy that only comes from tearing someone else down to elevate herself. Derek sat to her right, playing the role of the conquering Wall Street titan to absolute perfection. He swirled a glass of imported scotch, telling exaggerated, completely fabricated stories to his uncles about his aggressive negotiation tactics. He bragged about how he had single-handedly saved the family legacy by liquidating a toxic asset. He spoke about the $20 million deal with Apex Hospitality as if it were pocket change. Nia sat quietly beside him, wearing a stunning black evening gown. She took slow, measured sips of her sparkling water. To the rest of the family, she looked like the proud, supportive wife of a financial genius. But I knew the truth. Nia was a fiercely intelligent woman who knew exactly what was about to happen. She was simply sitting back, maintaining her flawless cover and waiting for the federal guillotine to drop on her fraudulent husband. I arrived at the country club just as the main course was being cleared away. I did not sneak in through the back. I did not arrive looking like a defeated, broken woman begging for her family to show her mercy. I walked straight through the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom, wearing a razor-sharp, custom-tailored crimson power suit that screamed absolute untouchable authority. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind me with a loud, echoing thud. The entire dining room went completely silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Aunts and uncles turned in their velvet chairs, their eyes widening in shock as they took in my appearance. I was not covered in drywall dust. I was not wearing work boots. I looked like a billionaire CEO walking into a boardroom, and my presence instantly sucked the oxygen out of Patricia's victory parade. My mother stood up abruptly from her chair, her face flushing an angry, defensive red. She clearly expected me to cause a scene, to cry, or to scream about my stolen resort in front of the extended family. She wanted me to look unstable so she could justify her cruelty to the relatives. But I simply offered a polite, icy smile and walked slowly toward the head table, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. "What are you doing here, Caroline?" Patricia demanded, her voice loud and dripping with condescension. "This is a private celebration for the successful members of this family. You were explicitly not invited." I stopped a few feet from the table, casually taking a flute of champagne from a passing waiter's silver tray. "I heard you were celebrating a massive real estate transaction," I said smoothly, my eyes locking onto my brother. I would not miss the opportunity to see Derek bask in his hard-earned success. Derek let out a loud, mocking laugh, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. He looked at the relatives, playing up his arrogant persona. She is just bitter, Derek announced to the room. She tried to hoard Dad's property, and she failed. I took control of the LLC this morning and sold the entire resort to a nationwide conglomerate. $20 million all cash. The wire hits my accounts tomorrow afternoon. Patricia stepped forward, placing a manicured hand on Derek's shoulder. She looked me up and down with absolute withering pity. Do not worry, Caroline, my mother sneered, making sure her voice carried to every single corner of the silent ballroom. You will not starve on the streets. Derek is a generous man. He actually asked the new corporate owners at Apex Hospitality to hire you as a housekeeper for the resort. We look after our own in this family. You can still sweep the floors and clean the toilets. It is honest work for someone with your limited educational background. A few of the more loyal, sycophantic cousins chuckled softly at her cruel joke. Nia did not laugh. She kept her face perfectly blank, but her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. The silent communication between us was electric. She knew I had the USB drive. She knew the federal trap was fully armed. I did not flush with embarrassment. I did not defend my education or my career. I simply raised my champagne glass high in the air, allowing the crystal to catch the light of the chandeliers. To Derek, I announced, my voice carrying a smooth, deadly clarity that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. May you get exactly what you have earned from the federal government. Derek rolled his eyes and laughed loudly, completely oblivious to the terrifying literal truth of my words. He thought I was making a petty, desperate threat about taxes or local zoning violations. He thought I was just a bitter, defeated sister grasping at straws because I had lost my $15 million property. Thanks for the toast, Caroline. Derek scoffed, raising his glass of scotch in a mocking salute. But the federal government does not care about your little temper tantrums. Now get out of here. I have a very early morning tomorrow. I have an in-person signing at the Apex headquarters in Manhattan at 9 o'clock sharp. I need my rest before I go collect my $20 million. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my champagne. It was a cold, highly calculated smile that finally made Patricia falter slightly, a tiny flicker of doubt crossing her arrogant features. I would not dream of keeping you past your bedtime, Derek, I said softly, setting my half-empty glass down on a nearby table. I suggest you dress your absolute best for your meeting tomorrow. Apex Hospitality takes its corporate acquisitions very seriously. I turned my back on my toxic family and walked out of the grand ballroom with the exact same unhurried, dominant stride I had used to enter. I left them sitting in their echo chamber of lies, completely unaware that their entire world was about to be violently torn apart. Derek thought he was walking into a routine corporate meeting tomorrow morning to collect a massive fortune. He had absolutely no idea that the chairman of Apex Hospitality was going to be sitting at the head of that boardroom table waiting for him. He had no idea that he was walking directly into a federal execution chamber, and I was the one holding the axe. From the 75th floor of the Apex Hospitality headquarters, I sat silently in the high-backed leather chair at the head of the main boardroom table. My chair was turned completely around, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. I had the ground floor security camera feed streaming directly to a sleek tablet resting on the polished mahogany in front of me. I watched with cold, absolute satisfaction as my family arrived for their execution. The morning sun hit the gleaming glass facade of the building as a black luxury town car pulled up to the curb. My brother Derek stepped out first, aggressively adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. Even through the security feed, I could see the frantic, desperate energy radiating from him. He immediately pulled out his smartphone, staring at the screen. I knew exactly what he was looking at. He was staring at the catastrophic negative balance caused by the massive margin call hanging over his head. But in his arrogant, delusional mind, that terrifying red number was about to turn into $20 million in pure, untraceable cash. Nia stepped out of the car next, She wore a flawless emerald green coat to protect against the crisp city wind, clutching her designer handbag tightly against her side. Inside that bag was the foreclosure notice on their penthouse, a physical reminder of her husband's absolute failure. She maintained a serene, perfectly composed expression, walking 2 steps behind Derek. She played the role of the supportive wife beautifully, even though she knew her husband was walking straight into a federal trap. She had secured her daughter's educational trust with me the night before, and now she was more than ready to watch Derek fall. My mother, Patricia, followed closely behind them. She stepped onto the sidewalk and tipped her head back, literally awestruck by the sheer size and intimidating power of the towering skyscraper. She was practically vibrating with toxic, overwhelming pride. I turned the volume up on my tablet, listening to the high-definition audio feed as they walked through the revolving doors and entered the massive lobby. The ground floor of the Apex building was a masterclass in billionaire-level wealth. Imported Italian marble floors stretched out beneath soaring ceilings, and a massive cascading waterfall feature rushed behind the main reception desk. Patricia let out a loud gasp of sheer delight, grabbing Derek by the arm. "This is exactly where you belong, Derek," my mother announced, her voice echoing loudly through the pristine lobby. "You belong in a place that practically prints money, surrounded by real corporate executives, not out in the mud sweeping up drywall dust and playing with power tools like your sister." Caroline never understood that true power is built in boardrooms, not by playing in the dirt. "You are the true heir to this family." Derek smirked eagerly, soaking up his mother's praise to soothe his bruised ego. He marched directly up to the main reception desk, completely bypassing a small line of professionals waiting to sign in. He slapped his palm flat against the polished stone counter. "I am Derek," he demanded, using his loudest, most aggressive Wall Street voice. "I am here to execute a $20 million asset transfer. Tell your acquisitions director to get the wire transfer documents ready immediately. I do not have time to wait around in the lobby." The receptionist did not flinch. She had been thoroughly briefed by my legal team on exactly how to handle him. She simply looked at his name on her screen, pressed a button on her earpiece, and offered a polite, deeply knowing smile. "We have been expecting you, sir," the receptionist replied smoothly. "The executive team is waiting for you in the primary boardroom on the 75th floor. Please proceed directly to the private elevator." I watched on the cameras as they were escorted to the VIP glass elevator. The cab shot upward at breakneck speed. Derek practically bounced on his heels, nervously fixing his tie in the reflection of the glass doors. Patricia patted his shoulder openly, whispering about the luxury cars, the designer clothes, and the expensive vacations they were going to buy by the weekend. Nia remained completely silent. Her sharp eyes remained fixed on the changing floor numbers, her face an unreadable mask. The elevator chimed softly as they reached the penthouse level. The doors slid open to reveal a massive, heavily secured executive floor. A pair of silent security guards in dark suits immediately stepped forward, motioning for my family to proceed down a long, dimly lit corridor lined with modern art. They reached a set of towering, frosted glass doors. The gold plaque on the wall read, "Office of the Chairman." I tapped the screen of my tablet, closing the security feed. I folded my hands together in my lap and waited. Derek pushed the heavy glass doors open, strutting into the room like he owned the entire building. The executive boardroom was breathtaking. A massive, solid mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, polished to a mirror shine. Legal documents were neatly arranged in thick leather folders at the center of the table, sitting right next to a silver pen. The heavy glass doors hissed shut behind them, locking with a definitive electronic click. Derek puffed out his chest, stepping up to the table, fully ready to demand his $20 million wire transfer from whatever corporate suit was running this meeting. Patricia walked in behind him, looking around the room with greedy, wide eyes. But the room was completely silent. At the very head of the long mahogany table, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling city, sat the massive high-backed leather chair. It was turned completely around, facing away from them. Derek cleared his throat loudly, trying to project absolute authority. "I am here to sign the final paperwork," he announced to the back of the chair. "Let us get this done." The leather chair did not move. Someone was already sitting in it, and the execution was about to begin. The heavy leather chair slowly swiveled around to face the center of the room. I did not say a word. I simply sat there at the head of the massive mahogany table, my hands perfectly steepled in front of me. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal gray power suit that commanded absolute respect. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me, casting long, intimidating shadows across the polished wood. Derek froze. The arrogant, puffed-out posture he had carried into the room vanished in an instant. His arms dropped limply to his sides. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The booming, authoritative Wall Street voice he had just used to demand his $20 million completely evaporated. My mother, Patricia, stopped dead in her tracks right behind him. She clutched her expensive designer handbag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes darted from my face to the luxurious surroundings of the executive boardroom, desperately trying to make sense of a situation that completely defied her carefully constructed reality. Nia stood quietly near the back of the room by the glass doors. She kept her face perfectly blank, but I could see a faint, satisfied gleam in her sharp eyes. She was watching the exact moment her husband realized he was not the predator. He was the prey. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the massive boardroom was the faint, rhythmic ticking of a modern grandfather clock on the far wall. It was the sound of my family's delusion slowly cracking under the weight of undeniable truth. Finally, Patricia broke the silence. Her shock quickly morphed into defensive, venomous indignation. She refused to accept what her own eyes were showing her. She stepped out from behind Derek, pointing a manicured finger directly at me. "What are you doing here, Caroline?" My mother gasped, her voice shrill and echoing uncomfortably in the quiet space. "Did you sneak into this building to beg for a job? I told you yesterday at the country club that Derek would ask the new owners to hire you as a housekeeper. You did not need to follow us all the way to Manhattan and trespass in a corporate office just to secure a cleaning position." Derek seemed to snap out of his trance at his mother's words. He desperately latched onto her absurd logic, needing to believe that I was just a desperate, pathetic sister trying to ruin his big moment. His massive margin call was hanging over his head like an anvil, and he could not afford to let anything jeopardize his cash wire transfer. His face flushed a dark, angry red as he marched up to the edge of the boardroom table. "Get out of that chair right now," Caroline, Derek ordered, slapping his palm violently against the mahogany wood. "This is a secure corporate floor. You are completely insane for following us here. I am about to sign a $20 million asset transfer with the executive board of this conglomerate. If you ruin this deal for me, I swear I will have you arrested for stalking and corporate espionage. Get out of this room before I call security." I did not flinch. I did not move from my seat. I simply looked at my brother with a cold, unblinking stare that made him swallow hard. "You do not need to call security, Derek," I said, my voice smooth, even, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Security already knows exactly who is in this room. In fact, they are standing right outside those glass doors waiting for my signal." Before Derek could process the absolute certainty in my voice, a side door connecting the boardroom to a private executive suite clicked open. My lead attorney, Donovan, stepped into the room. He was wearing a flawless dark navy suit, carrying a thick leather folder filled with official corporate transfer documents. He did not look like a cheap small-town lawyer fighting over a local zoning dispute anymore. He looked exactly like what he was: a ruthless, highly paid corporate attorney for a massive national conglomerate. Patricia recognized him immediately from the brief, tense encounter at the country house 2 days ago. She let out a loud, scoffing laugh, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "You brought your cheap little lawyer with you," Patricia mocked, rolling her eyes in disgust. "This is absolutely pathetic, Caroline. Do you honestly think bringing a small-town attorney into a Manhattan skyscraper is going to intimidate us? We are here to meet with the board of directors of Apex Hospitality. We are not playing your petty legal games today." Donovan did not look at my mother. He ignored her completely. He walked calmly to the head of the table and took his designated seat right beside me. He placed the heavy leather folder on the table and opened it, revealing the final wire transfer agreements Derek had digitally transmitted the day before. Good morning, Derek Donovan, said his voice carrying a crisp professional authority that immediately commanded the room. Good morning, Patricia. I highly suggest you lower your voices and show some immediate respect. You are standing in a private executive boardroom, and you are currently speaking to the founder, chief executive officer, and majority shareholder of Apex Hospitality, Caroline. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Patricia stopped breathing. Her arrogant, mocking smile was instantly wiped from her face. She stared at Donovan, then slowly turned her head to look at me. Her mind was frantically trying to reject the information, but the luxurious power suit, the massive corner office, and the sheer undeniable authority radiating from me made it impossible to deny. The daughter she had constantly belittled and treated like dirt was sitting on a throne she could never even dream of reaching. Derek stumbled backward. His expensive leather boots caught on the edge of the plush carpet. He had to reach out and grab the back of a nearby leather guest chair to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. He looked at the legal documents sitting on the table, then up at me sitting in the chairman's seat. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down on him with devastating force. The $20 million buyer he had desperately contacted yesterday. The faceless corporate entity that had agreed to bail him out of his massive margin call. The conglomerate he had just legally transmitted a forged power of attorney to across state lines. It was all me. No! Derek stammered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. No, that is impossible. You do not own a national hospitality conglomerate. You have been playing in the dirt for 10 years. You are a college dropout. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished mahogany table. I looked at the man who had tormented me for my entire life and let out a soft and sharp laugh. I am a college dropout, I agreed, my voice echoing in the massive executive boardroom. I dropped out of my sophomore year because 10 years ago, Mother marched into my dorm room and packed my textbooks into cardboard boxes. She forced me to leave my university to run our father's failing property management office after his stroke. She did it so she could keep paying her expensive country club dues. And she did it so you could keep using my designated tuition money to fund your reckless and arrogant Wall Street fantasies. Patricia opened her mouth to protest, her face flushing a deep and defensive crimson. She tried to step forward to slap down my accusations, to tell Donovan and the invisible security guards that I was just a hysterical and ungrateful child. But she could not find a single word to say. The sheer weight of the billionaire-level corporate headquarters surrounding us completely suffocated her usual toxic bravado. While you were busy blowing millions of dollars on terrible stock options and losing your Manhattan penthouse, I was actually working. I continued, my gaze fixed entirely on my brother. I took the pathetic scraps of our father's failing business and turned them into massive capital. I spent the last 10 years quietly buying up distressed commercial properties across the country. I bought bankrupt hotels, abandoned warehouses, and failing retail centers. I renovated them from the ground up. I flipped them for massive profits. I built an entire network of anonymous holding companies to shield my wealth from this greedy family. Derek was shaking his head slowly back and forth. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the ground crumble beneath his expensive leather boots. 5 years ago, I stated ensuring every single syllable landed like a physical blow. I used that capital to buy a controlling 60% interest in this exact conglomerate. I built Apex Hospitality. I am the sole reason this tower exists. Donovan stood beside me, looking down at my family with the clinical detachment of an executioner. He had watched me build my fortune over the last decade. He knew the countless sleepless nights, the ruthless negotiations, and the sheer willpower it took to climb from a discarded daughter to the apex of the commercial real estate world. Donovan crossed his arms and let the heavy silence stretch, allowing my family to suffocate in the overwhelming atmosphere of the 75th floor. Nia stood silently near the heavy glass doors. Her emerald green suit looked flawless under the recessed lighting. She watched her husband shrink into a pathetic and terrified shell of a man. Nia was a fiercely intelligent African-American woman who had spent years fighting for her place in the corporate world. She knew exactly what it took to build an empire from scratch. The profound respect in her eyes was undeniable. She looked at me not as a sister-in-law, but as a predator who had masterfully executed the perfect hunt. I turned my attention to my mother. Patricia was gripping the back of a leather guest chair, looking at me as if I were an alien creature she had never seen before. The reality of my wealth completely shattered her entire worldview. She had spent my entire life measuring my worth by my proximity to a wealthy man, constantly comparing me to the women at her country club who married into money. She had worshipped Derek simply because he wore expensive suits and worked on Wall Street. Now she was standing in a room that generated more revenue in a single day than her golden boy had handled in his entire fraudulent career. "You thought the Oak Haven retreat was a desperate attempt to cling to a ruined country house," I told her, my voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "You looked at my work boots and my drywall dust and you automatically assumed I was a failure. You thought I was just playing contractor in the dirt because you are blinded by your own outdated and pathetic sexism. You believe only men like Derek are capable of handling real money." Patricia swallowed hard. Her diamond necklace caught the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but she had never looked cheaper or more insignificant. Oak Haven was never my main source of income. I revealed, watching the absolute horror dawn on my mother's face. It was just a personal passion project. I kept that rural estate because I actually loved Dad, and I wanted to restore the one single piece of property he actually cared about before you two drove him into an early grave with your endless demands for cash. It was a drop in the bucket compared to my actual net worth. Derek let out a strange, strangled gasp. He pressed his hands against the edge of the mahogany table, trying to steady his shaking legs. He looked down at the heavy leather folder sitting on the table right in front of Donovan. He stared at the thick stack of wire transfer documents he had been so desperate to sign just yesterday. His mind was finally catching up to the terrifying reality of the trap he had sprinted into. I reached over and picked up the heavy leather folder. I opened it with slow and deliberate precision. I pulled out the final purchase contract. It was the exact $20 million commercial real estate contract Derek had digitally signed yesterday morning from his luxury hotel suite in Connecticut. I slid the crisp and thick stack of papers across the long mahogany table. The pages glided smoothly over the polished wood and stopped right at my brother's trembling fingertips. Derek stared down at the final signature line. He saw his own name perfectly printed and digitally authenticated. Right next to it was the blatantly forged signature of our late father, the signature Derek had spent 3 hours tracing at his kitchen island, while a hidden nanny camera recorded his every single move. The silence in the boardroom was absolute and deafening. The ticking of the grandfather clock felt like a countdown to total annihilation. Derek looked up from the forged contract. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a primal, inescapable terror. He finally realized that the anonymous corporate buyer who had promised to bail him out of his massive margin call was a complete phantom. There was no $20 million cash wire coming to save him. There was only me. I stood up slowly from the high-backed leather chair. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal gray power suit and leaned over the polished boardroom table. I locked eyes with my brother, watching the absolute crushing terror finally consume his entire existence. "You just sold my own property back to me using a forged signature," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous and quiet whisper that chilled the entire room. "Do you realize what you have just done?" Derek stared at the forged signature of our late father. His chest heaved as his brain finally caught up to the catastrophic reality of his situation. The massive $20 million safety net he thought he had secured was completely gone. In its place was a gaping, terrifying federal abyss. Pure animalistic panic overtook him. With a sudden, desperate cry, Derek lunged across the wide mahogany table. He threw his entire body weight forward, his expensive suit jacket knocking over a crystal water glass. It shattered against the polished wood, sending water cascading over the edge. His hands clawed frantically at the thick stack of transfer documents. He wanted to rip the paper into shreds. He genuinely believed that destroying the physical contract right there in the boardroom would magically erase the crime he had committed. Donovan did not even flinch. Before my brother's trembling fingers could grasp the documents, Donovan calmly placed his hand flat over the leather folder and slid it smoothly out of reach. Derek slammed his hands against the table, gasping for air. "Give that back to me," he demanded, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "That is a private family document. You have no right to keep it." "I am tearing it up. The deal is off. We are canceling the transaction right now." Donovan looked at my brother with a mixture of professional disgust and absolute pity. "Tearing up a piece of paper in a Manhattan high-rise does not erase a digital footprint," Derek Donovan stated, his voice ringing with absolute clinical authority. "You are thinking like a child caught stealing candy. You need to start thinking like a man facing a federal indictment." Donovan opened a separate file on his tablet and turned the screen around so Derek and my mother could see it perfectly. It displayed the heavily encrypted time-stamped email Derek had sent from his luxury hotel suite the previous morning. "The physical paper on this table is just a courtesy printout," Donovan explained coldly. "The actual crime occurred exactly 24 hours ago. You sat in the state of Connecticut. You attached a blatantly forged legal document claiming executive control over a multi-million-dollar commercial asset. You then transmitted that fraudulent document across state lines to our corporate servers here in New York to secure a massive financial wire transfer. The electronic signatures are already authenticated, filed, and locked into our corporate registry." Derek stumbled backward, his legs giving out. He collapsed hard into his leather guest chair. His eyes were wide, staring blankly at the unchangeable digital timestamp on the tablet screen. "Do you understand the specific laws you have broken?" Donovan asked, stepping around the table to stand directly over my brother. "This is no longer a civil dispute over a country house. By transmitting that forged signature across state borders, you committed interstate wire fraud. By tracing your deceased father's signature to steal a commercial entity, you committed aggravated identity theft. And by attempting to illegally liquidate a $15 million resort to cover your personal margin, you committed grand larceny. Every single one of these offenses carries a mandatory federal prison sentence." My mother let out a sharp, horrifying gasp. The pristine, arrogant facade she had maintained her entire life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Patricia looked at Derek, her golden child, the son she had sacrificed my entire future to protect. She saw a broken, terrified criminal. The reality of the situation crashed down on her with devastating, suffocating force. "Federal prison." The words echoed in the silent boardroom. She realized that Derek was not going to a country club. He was going to lose his freedom, his reputation, and every single cent to his name. Patricia began to hyperventilate. Her hands flew to her chest, clutching her expensive diamond necklace as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. Her perfectly styled hair fell into her eyes as she frantically shook her head back and forth. "No," Patricia gasped, her voice trembling violently. "No, this is a mistake. This is just a misunderstanding. Caroline, tell your lawyer to delete the email. Tell him to wipe the servers. We are your family. You cannot do this to your own brother." I sat perfectly still in the chairman's seat. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. "You did not think about family when you marched into my resort and told me I had 48 hours to pack my bags," I replied, my voice steady and devoid of any mercy. "You did not think about family when you stood in a country club yesterday and publicly joked about me cleaning toilets for a living. You both tried to strip me of everything I built, and you did it with a smile on your faces. You pushed me into a corner, Mother. I simply removed the corner." "But he is going to go to jail!" Patricia screamed, tears ruining her flawless makeup. "He will lose his career. He will lose everything. You cannot be this cruel." "I am not being cruel," I stated calmly. "I am being exact." Derek made his choices. He forged the document. He sent the email. He tried to steal a commercial empire because he was too arrogant to admit he had failed on Wall Street. I am not sending him to prison. His own greed is sending him to prison." Derek buried his face in his hands. He let out a loud, pathetic sob that echoed miserably in the pristine boardroom. He was completely trapped, and he knew it. The walls of the 75th floor were closing in on him. Nia remained completely silent by the glass doors. She watched her husband break down into a weeping, helpless mess. Her expression was entirely devoid of sympathy. She knew what she had to do next to protect her daughter, and she was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Before Patricia could drop to her knees to beg for forgiveness, a sharp electronic chime interrupted the heavy silence. The speakerphone embedded in the center of the massive mahogany table lit up with a bright green light. The crisp, professional voice of my executive receptionist echoed clearly through the boardroom. "Excuse me, Ms. Caroline," the receptionist announced, completely unaware of the absolute destruction taking place inside the room. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation agents you requested have arrived. They are currently waiting in the main lobby." The crisp voice of the executive receptionist echoing through the speakerphone sliced through the heavy, suffocating air of the 75th floor boardroom. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was waiting in the lobby. The abstract threat of legal consequences had instantly materialized into armed federal agents standing just an elevator ride away. For a moment, the room was so profoundly quiet that I could hear the rapid, shallow breathing of my brother sitting across from me. Derek stared blankly at the speakerphone. His mind simply could not process the magnitude of what was happening. The golden boy of Wall Street, the man who had spent his entire life taking whatever he wanted without ever facing a single consequence, was completely paralyzed by the reality of his own destruction. But my mother reacted instantly. The pristine, arrogant facade Patricia had maintained for her entire life completely shattered. The woman who had marched into my country estate 2 days ago, wearing white cashmere and demanding my eviction, suddenly folded like a house of cards. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the expensive corporate carpeting, her designer dress crumpling around her legs. Patricia dropped to her knees right beside my high-backed leather chair. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands and grabbed the fabric of my tailored suit skirt. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her flawless, expensive makeup and leaving dark, ugly streaks across her cheeks. She was hyperventilating, gasping for air, as the sheer terror of losing her favorite child consumed her entirely. "Caroline, please!" Patricia wailed, her voice cracking with a raw, pathetic desperation that I had never heard from her before. "Please, you have to stop this. Tell your lawyer to send the agents away. Tell them it was a corporate misunderstanding. He is your brother. You cannot send him to federal prison. We are family." I looked down at the woman kneeling on the floor beside me. For 33 years, this woman had done everything in her power to make me feel small, insignificant, and entirely unworthy of love. She had stripped me of my education to fund Derek's lifestyle. She had publicly mocked my career choices to her wealthy friends. She had gleefully tried to steal my $15 million resort just to cover up the disastrous financial failures of the son she worshipped. And now, when the consequences of their relentless greed had finally caught up to them, she dared to use the word family to beg for mercy. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel the familiar childhood urge to comfort her or seek her approval. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, exact justice. I stepped back, forcing her grasping hands to fall away from my skirt. I looked down at her with the clinical, detached stare of a CEO dealing with a severe liability. "You do not get to invoke the word family today, Mother," I said, my voice echoing with a dangerous, quiet authority that made her flinch. "You did not care about family when you walked into my resort and demanded I hand over the keys. You did not care about family when you laughed in my face at the country club and told me to go clean toilets." Patricia sobbed violently, clutching her hands to her chest. She was shaking her head back and forth, desperate to rewrite the narrative. "We were just trying to protect the family assets," she pleaded, her voice thick with tears. "Derek was desperate. He was in financial trouble, and he just wanted to make us proud again. He made a mistake, Caroline. Just one mistake. You cannot ruin his entire life over a piece of paper." I pointed to the forged contract sitting on the mahogany table. He did not make a mistake. He executed a highly calculated, premeditated federal crime. He sat at his kitchen island and practiced forging his dead father's signature for 3 hours. He crossed state lines and attempted to steal $20 million to cover a margin call caused by his own sheer incompetence. I leaned down slightly, making sure my eyes locked directly onto her terrified, tear-filled gaze. "You gave me 48 hours to pack up my life," I whispered, ensuring every single syllable hit her like a physical strike. "You looked me in the eye and told me I was not your daughter if I did not comply with your demands. Well, Mother, I complied. I stopped acting like your daughter, and I started acting like the chairman of this conglomerate. This is just business now." Patricia let out a loud, agonizing cry, burying her face in her hands. She was completely broken. She realized that the scapegoat daughter she had treated like dirt for over 3 decades was now holding the absolute power of life and death over her golden child, and I had zero intention of showing mercy. Derek sat frozen in his chair, a weeping, pathetic mess. He was too cowardly to even speak up for himself. He simply sat there and let his mother grovel on the floor for his freedom, proving exactly what kind of weak, spineless man he truly was. Across the room, standing by the frosted glass doors, Nia had watched the entire pathetic display in absolute silence. She watched her mother-in-law beg on her knees. She watched her husband cower in his seat, completely paralyzed by his own monumental failure. The disgust radiating from Nia's eyes was palpable. She was a fiercely intelligent, pragmatic woman, and she knew the federal agents were currently stepping into the elevators on the ground floor. Nia knew the time for maintaining her supportive wife facade was officially over. Nia stood up incredibly straight, smoothing the wrinkles from her emerald green designer suit. Her face was completely expressionless, a mask of absolute calculated resolve. She did not shed a tear. She did not offer a single word of comfort to the man she had married. She calmly unclasped her designer purse. She reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents bound by a severe black clip. Nia walked slowly across the plush carpet, her heels sinking into the floor with deliberate, measured steps. She stopped right beside Derek's chair. Derek looked up at her through his tears, his eyes wide with a sudden, desperate hope. He thought his brilliant, capable wife was pulling out a legal loophole, a financial lifeline, or a defense strategy that would somehow save him from the FBI. Nia did not look at him with love. She looked at him with utter, chilling contempt. She raised her hand and slammed the thick stack of papers violently onto the mahogany table right in front of Derek's face. The sharp, violent smack of the thick legal document hitting the mahogany table echoed like a gunshot through the executive boardroom. The sudden noise instantly silenced my mother's pathetic, gasping sobs. Patricia froze on the floor, still clutching the fabric of my tailored skirt. Her tear-streaked face turned slowly upward to look at her daughter-in-law. Derek blinked rapidly, tearing his bloodshot eyes away from my face to look down at the heavy stack of papers Nia had just slammed right in front of him. His trembling hands hovered over the crisp white pages. He was completely disoriented. He looked up at Nia, a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope flashing in his panicked eyes. He actually thought she was throwing down a legal loophole, a brilliant corporate defense strategy, or some sort of financial lifeline that would magically save him from the federal abyss he had just fallen into. Nia stared back at him. Her face was a flawless, unreadable mask of absolute contempt. She did not offer him a comforting smile. She did not reach out to hold his hand or tell him they would weather this storm together. She simply pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the top page of the document. "Read it," Derek, Nia commanded. Her voice was ice-cold and razor-sharp. "Read exactly what I am handing you." Derek looked down. The bold black legal font stared back at him, cutting through his delusion with brutal clarity. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. Right beneath it was an emergency petition for sole physical and legal custody of their daughter. And attached to the very back was a financial injunction completely severing Nia from his toxic, heavily leveraged corporate debts. Derek's breath hitched violently in his throat. He looked up at his wife, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Nia, what is this?" He choked out, his voice cracking. "We are supposed to be a team. We are supposed to fight this together." Nia let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through the intense tension in the room. "Fight this together," she repeated, stepping back from the table and crossing her arms over her emerald green suit. "You stopped being my teammate the exact moment you lied to me about our home. You told me you leveraged our Manhattan penthouse to fund a brilliant new tech startup. You promised me you were building generational wealth for our daughter. Instead, you gambled our home away on terrible market positions, lost everything, and hid the foreclosure notices from me like a coward. Patricia gasped from the floor, finally releasing her grip on my skirt. She looked at Derek in absolute horror. Foreclosure, my mother whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Derek, what is she talking about? You told me you had millions in liquid assets. You told me you were expanding your firm. Nia did not even look at Patricia. She kept her furious, calculated gaze locked entirely on her husband. You are entirely broke, Derek, Nia stated, exposing his ultimate shame to the entire room. You are drowning in a massive margin call, and you were so incredibly desperate to cover up your own catastrophic failures that you tried to steal a $15 million resort from your own sister. You actually thought you could outsmart a woman who built an empire from the ground up while you were busy playing pretend on Wall Street. The ultimate betrayal finally clicked in Derek's panicking mind. He stared at Nia, tears spilling over his eyelashes. You knew, Derek whispered. You knew this was a trap. Nia smiled, a cold, ruthless expression that perfectly mirrored my own. I knew the exact moment you sat at our kitchen island and spent 3 hours practicing tracing your dead father's signature, Nia revealed, watching the remaining color completely drain from her husband's face. You were so incredibly arrogant that you did not even notice the hidden nanny camera recording your every single move. I took that footage. I handed it directly to Caroline in a restaurant restroom last night. In exchange, she funded a permanent, untouchable educational trust for our daughter. I secured my child's future by handing your sister the exact evidence she needed to destroy yours. Nia leaned over the table, bringing her face mere inches from his. I married a man I thought was smart. Instead, I married a fraud who tried to steal from a woman 10 times his superior. I am taking everything you have left, Derek. Something inside Derek finally snapped. The sheer, overwhelming weight of his total destruction completely broke his mind. He had lost his $20 million payout. He had lost his career. He had lost his mother's delusion of his absolute perfection. And now he had lost his wife and his child. He let out a primal, enraged scream. Derek lunged across the polished mahogany table. He reached out with violent, grasping hands, trying to wrap his fingers around Nia's throat. He wanted to physically hurt her for exposing him, for outsmarting him, and for surviving his sinking ship. But Donovan had already anticipated the violent, erratic reaction of a cornered animal. Before Derek could even clear the center of the table, 2 massive corporate security guards materialized from the shadows of the room. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. One guard grabbed Derek by the collar of his expensive suit jacket, hauling him forcefully backward. The second guard grabbed his flailing arms, twisting them sharply behind his back. They slammed Derek face down onto the polished mahogany table with a sickening heavy thud. Derek thrashed wildly, screaming and kicking against the wood, but the guards pinned him down with absolute unbreakable force. His cheek was pressed hard against the very same forged contract he had tried to use to steal my company. Patricia shrieked, crawling frantically across the carpet toward the table. "Stop it!" she wailed, reaching her hands up toward the guards. "You are hurting him! Let my son go!" She clawed blindly at the security guard's pant leg, but the man did not even look down at her. He simply stepped to the side, leaving her grasping at empty air. Derek lay pinned against the table, gasping for breath, tears and saliva mixing on the polished wood. He locked eyes with me from across the table. He looked completely and utterly defeated. The golden child was finally broken. Then the heavy frosted glass doors of the executive boardroom burst wide open. The heavy brass handles hit the walls with a loud, resounding crash. 3 federal agents wearing dark suits and tactical windbreakers strode into the room, their hands resting firmly on the steel handcuffs hooked to their belts. The 3 federal agents stepped onto the plush carpet of the executive boardroom with heavy, deliberate strides. They moved with a synchronized, overwhelming authority that instantly suffocated whatever tiny shred of hope my brother still possessed. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern face and absolutely zero patience for corporate entitlement, walked directly toward the center of the mahogany table. Derek let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper as my private security guards hauled him up from the polished wood. They held him firmly by the arms, his expensive suit jacket now completely wrinkled and twisted around his shoulders. His custom silk tie was askew, and a red angry welt was already forming on his cheek, where it had been pressed hard against the forged contract. Derek, the lead federal agent, stated, his voice ringing with absolute chilling finality. "You are under arrest for interstate wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The metallic sharp click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around my brother's wrists echoed like a final gavel strike through the massive room. Derek physically went limp. His knees buckled completely, and if the federal agents had not grabbed him by the biceps to hold him up, he would have collapsed into a weeping puddle on the floor. He tried to speak. He tried to use the arrogant, fast-talking Wall Street charm that had always gotten him out of trouble before. He opened his mouth to blame his mother, to blame me, to invent some ridiculous corporate misunderstanding, but only wet, pathetic gasps escaped his throat. Then Patricia completely lost her mind. The reality of the handcuffs locking around the wrists of her golden child snapped something fundamental inside my mother's brain. The pristine status-obsessed matriarch who cared about nothing more than her country club reputation suddenly went entirely feral. She scrambled up from the floor, her designer dress tearing at the knee. With a wild, hysterical scream, Patricia lunged forward and physically threw herself at the lead federal agent. "Get your hands off my son!" Patricia shrieked, her voice cracking with raw, unhinged desperation. She began hammering her fists against the tactical windbreaker of the federal agent. "He is a good boy. He is a successful investor. You are arresting the wrong person. Take her. Take the girl." She set him up. She is the one who trapped him. The lead agent did not even flinch at her blows, but his expression hardened into pure, uncompromising granite. "Mom, step back immediately," he ordered, his voice booming like thunder. "You are interfering with a federal arrest. Step back right now or you will be detained." Patricia did not listen. She was completely blinded by her toxic, obsessive need to protect her favorite child from facing a single consequence. She clawed frantically at the agent's arm, trying to physically rip his hand away from Derek's shoulder. Her manicured nails scratched deep into the agent's wrist, drawing a bright line of blood. That was her fatal mistake. A second federal agent stepped forward instantly. He grabbed Patricia by the wrist, twisting her arms sharply behind her back with practiced, overwhelming force. He slammed her forward against the frosted glass wall of the boardroom. Her cheek hit the cold glass with a loud thud, completely ruining her perfect hair and smudging her expensive makeup across the transparent surface. "You are under arrest for assaulting a federal officer and obstruction of justice," the second agent announced coldly, pulling a second pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Patricia wailed. It was a guttural, terrifying sound of absolute defeat. She thrashed against the glass, sobbing violently as the cold steel locked tightly around her own wrists. She had spent her entire life judging people she deemed beneath her, acting like she was absolute royalty. Now she was being physically restrained against a wall like a common criminal, completely stripped of her dignity, her power, and her freedom. I did not flinch at her screams. I slowly turned my back on the chaotic, miserable scene unfolding at the center of the boardroom. I walked over to the towering floor-to-ceiling windows and folded my arms across the crisp fabric of my tailored power suit. I looked down at the sprawling, magnificent skyline of Manhattan stretching out beneath me. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the thousands of glass skyscrapers. 10 years ago, my mother had kicked me out of my childhood home, telling me I was nothing but a useless failure who would never amount to anything. She had sacrificed my education to fund the arrogant, greedy boy who was currently sobbing in federal handcuffs behind me. They had tried to bury me in the dirt, but they had completely forgotten that I was a developer. When you put me in the dirt, I build a foundation, and from that foundation, I built an untouchable empire. Nia walked calmly over to the mahogany table. She ignored her weeping, handcuffed husband completely. She smoothly gathered up her divorce documents, the emergency custody petition, and the financial severance paperwork, sliding them neatly into her designer handbag. She snapped the purse shut and walked toward the exit. As Nia passed by the floor-to-ceiling windows, she stopped for a fraction of a second. She looked at me, her sharp, intelligent eyes meeting mine. Two incredibly capable women who had just successfully amputated the dead weight from their lives. Nia gave me a slow, respectful nod. I nodded back. Nia walked out of the executive boardroom without ever looking back at Derek, leaving him entirely alone with his monumental failures. "All right, let us go," the lead federal agent ordered, yanking Derek upright. They began the perp walk. The federal agents marched my brother and my mother out of the executive boardroom. Derek dragged his feet, his head hanging down in absolute shame. He was being paraded through the pristine billionaire-level corridors of the conglomerate he had so arrogantly tried to steal. Every single one of my highly paid corporate executives, administrative assistants, and security personnel stood in the hallways watching the great Wall Street titan being hauled away in disgrace. As the agents shoved Derek into the waiting VIP elevator, Patricia dug her heels into the expensive carpet. She twisted her head around her tear-streaked, ruined face, glaring back down the long corridor toward the open doors of my boardroom. Her eyes burned with a venomous, desperate hatred. She had lost her golden boy. She had lost her freedom, and she knew it was entirely her own fault. "You will have nothing!" Patricia screamed at the top of her lungs, her hysterical voice echoing violently down the pristine corporate hallway. "Do you hear me, Caroline? You will have nothing. You will be alone forever." The echo of my mother's hysterical scream faded as the heavy elevator doors slid shut, cutting her off completely from my world. I stood in the absolute silence of the 75th floor boardroom, looking out over the sprawling Manhattan skyline. 10 years of being treated like a disposable workhorse had finally culminated in this exact moment of pure, undeniable justice. Donovan walked over to the mahogany table and calmly gathered the forged transfer documents, placing them securely into his leather briefcase. He stated that the execution was flawless, his voice reflecting the quiet satisfaction we both felt. By the time the evening news aired, the story of the arrest had already sent shockwaves through the financial district. Derek was booked into a federal holding facility in Lower Manhattan. Because he was facing multiple felony charges involving interstate wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, the federal prosecutor successfully argued to freeze every single one of his financial accounts. The massive margin call had already drained whatever liquid capital he had left, but the government seized the remaining fragments. He was allowed one phone call from the holding cell. He did not call his wife because Nia had already served him with a strict restraining order, along with her divorce petition. He tried to call his former Wall Street colleagues, the men he used to buy expensive imported scotch for at the country club. Every single one of them sent him straight to voicemail. In the brutal world of high finance, a man under federal indictment for forgery is a walking plague. Derek was completely radioactive, and he was entirely alone. My mother was released later that night with a severe citation for obstructing a federal officer, but her freedom came at a catastrophic cost. Because Derek had all his assets frozen by the feds, he could not afford a defense attorney. Patricia was forced to hire a high-powered white-collar criminal defense firm to keep her golden child out of a maximum security prison. The retainer fee alone was astronomical. Within 48 hours, Patricia had to contact a discount real estate broker to list her sprawling suburban mansion for a rapid all-cash sale. The woman who had obsessed over status her entire life was now frantically packing her designer gowns into cardboard boxes to move into a cheap rented apartment. The ultimate humiliation for Patricia came 3 days later. She attempted to walk into her exclusive country club, hoping to seek sympathy from her wealthy friends and spin a fabricated story about how her son was framed. But her keycard flashed red at the entrance. The club manager, a man she had treated like a servant for 20 years, politely informed her that the board of directors had held an emergency vote. Due to the highly publicized nature of her arrest, and her son being investigated by the FBI, their membership had been permanently revoked with immediate effect. Patricia was escorted off the premises by the same valet staff she used to belittle. Her carefully constructed social empire collapsed into absolute dust. While my biological family was drowning in the consequences of their own toxic greed, I was busy reclaiming my territory. Donovan submitted the official federal landmark status documents to the local county zoning board. The corrupt municipal inspector Higgins, who had slapped the bright red stop work order on my glass doors, was immediately placed on administrative leave, pending a massive internal investigation. When the local news caught wind of how a brilliant female developer had intentionally laid a financial trap to outsmart a fraudulent Wall Street broker, the public relations response was explosive. The false narrative my mother had spent years building about my incompetence was completely destroyed. Financial magazines and commercial real estate blogs ran feature stories on my aggressive acquisition strategies. The Oak Haven Retreat was no longer just a luxury wellness center. It became a symbol of absolute corporate triumph. The red sticker was ripped off my front doors. My loyal site foreman, Mike, brought the entire construction crew back to the property the very next morning. We doubled our efforts working seamlessly to apply the final architectural finishes. The custom infinity pool was filled, the spa pavilions were stocked with premium amenities, and the heavy iron construction gates were finally painted a gleaming glossy black. 2 months after Derek was hauled out of my corporate headquarters, the grand opening of my $15 million resort was officially announced. I stood on the sweeping stone steps of the main reception lodge, wearing a flawless tailored suit that perfectly matched the crisp morning air. The winding gravel driveway was freshly raked, and the valet staff stood at attention. A line of sleek luxury town cars and tinted SUVs began to curve around the valley road approaching my property. Top-tier investors, industry leaders, and VIP guests from all over the country were arriving to celebrate the birth of my empire. The glowing copper lanterns lining the driveway flickered to life as twilight draped over the valley. The Oak Haven Retreat was no longer a vision trapped inside crumpled blueprints. It was alive. Warm, inviting light poured from the floor-to-ceiling glass pavilions, illuminating the pristine stonework and casting long, elegant reflections across the mirror-flat surface of the terraced infinity pool. Soft jazz hummed from the concealed outdoor sound system, blending perfectly with the low, sophisticated murmur of over 200 high-profile guests. Donovan stood by my side on the main terrace holding a glass of high-end bourbon. His navy suit was impeccable, his expression relaxed for the first time in months. He looked out at the crowd of Silicon Valley tech executives, New York hospitality magnates, and elite wellness influencers who had flown in on private charters just to attend tonight. He whispered that the initial reviews were already calling Oak Haven the commercial triumph of the fiscal year, a masterful restoration that would redefine luxury hospitality. I took a slow sip of my vintage champagne, feeling the crisp, refreshing weight of absolute success. I was wearing a stunning, custom-tailored emerald velvet tuxedo jacket that commanded the entire terrace. Every handshake from an investor, every flash of a photographer's lens, and every quiet nod from an industry rival felt like a monument to my resilience. I had spent 3 grueling years sweating in this dirt, bleeding out my own capital, while my mother and brother plotted to erase me. Now the elites of the corporate world were paying premium membership fees just to stand on the ground my family had called a useless dump. A sleek black town car glided silently through the open glossy black iron security gates and pulled up to the valet ring. The passenger door opened and Nia stepped out. The crowd parted slightly as she walked onto the main terrace. Nia looked absolutely breathtaking, wearing a tailored, cream-colored silk jumpsuit paired with gold accents. She was a fiercely intelligent, completely independent woman who had successfully cut the dead weight of a fraudulent husband from her life. She carried her designer clutch like a shield of absolute victory. Her divorce had been finalized weeks ago, her sole custody of my niece, locked in through ironclad judicial decrees, and her financial assets completely insulated from the radioactive mess Derek had left behind. Nia walked directly toward me, her heels clicking with a measured, confident rhythm against the paved stone. She did not look like a woman mourning a broken marriage. She looked like an executive who had just signed the most profitable contract of her career. We stopped a few feet apart, the warm glow of the resort lights illuminating our faces. We did not share an emotional, dramatic embrace. Instead, we shared a slow, deliberate nod of profound mutual respect. We were two capable women who had looked into the eyes of the same toxic family, refused to be victims, and skillfully engineered our own independent futures. Thank you for the invitation, Caroline Nia said, her voice smooth, steady, and entirely professional. The resort is magnificent. You did exactly what you said you would do with this place. I raised my glass slightly. You earned your spot on the guest list, Nia. How is my niece? She is sleeping soundly at our new apartment in the city. Nia replied, a faint, genuine smile softening her sharp features. Her educational trust fund cleared the federal depository this morning. She is entirely secure, Caroline. Derek can never touch a single dollar of her future. Nia took a flute of champagne from a passing waiter's tray and leaned closer to me, her tone dropping to a quiet, clinical whisper. The federal prosecutor finalized the paperwork this afternoon. She revealed, her eyes locked onto mine. Derek took a plea deal. 5 years in a federal penitentiary for interstate wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. He waived his right to an appeal to avoid the maximum 15-year sentence. He will be self-surrendering to the federal marshals on Monday morning. The words hung in the air, cold, factual, and completely final. 5 years in federal prison. The absolute end of the Golden Boy's fraudulent Wall Street fantasies. Does Mother know? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly even. Nia let out a sharp, dismissive breath. Patricia spent the entire morning screaming at the defense attorneys in a rented office downtown, completely hysterical, because she realized her own savings are entirely gone. She is cited as a material witness. Her country club circle has completely erased her, and she has to face the reality that her favorite son is a convicted felon. She is entirely broke, Caroline. She is currently packing up the last of her things to move into a tiny one-bedroom rental on the outskirts of the county. I felt absolutely zero guilt. I did not feel a single twinge of familial sorrow or regret. My brother had tried to forcefully evict me, forge my father's signature, and rob me of my life's work just to cover his own criminal incompetence. My mother had cheered him on, treating me like a disposable servant until the exact moment the feds cuffed them both. They had demanded a cold transactional war, and I had simply given them a masterclass in corporate warfare. I turned back to the crowd, raising my glass high into the air, drawing the immediate attention of Donovan, my primary investors, and my core corporate team. To the future of Apex Hospitality, I announced, my voice carrying a clear, dominant resonance across the terrace. And to the Oak Haven retreat, may we always build our empires on the absolute truth. The investors cheered, clinking their glasses together as the jazz music swelled in the background. Donovan smiled, offering a respectful salute with his bourbon. I drank the remaining champagne, feeling the sweet, unadulterated taste of absolute victory. I had survived their betrayal, I had outsmarted their fraud, and I had built a legacy that would outlive their names. As the party reached its peak and the ballroom filled with laughter and dancing, I quietly stepped away from the crowd. I slipped down the side stone walkway, leaving the bright lights and the celebration behind me. I needed a moment of absolute solitude to process the completion of the circle. The night air was cool and crisp as I walked down the long, winding gravel driveway toward the front entrance of the estate. The crickets chirped softly in the dark valleys, and the rustle of the pine trees hung peaceful over the land. I walked until I reached the massive, heavy black iron security gates that stood tall against the starlit sky. I placed my hand against the cool, solid iron of the gate, looking back up the hill toward the breathtaking multi-million-dollar resort glowing brilliantly in the dark. I stood there alone in the quiet night, deeply reflecting on exactly where I had started just a few months ago, standing in the dusty ruins of a forgotten house with an eviction notice at my feet. I stood alone at the massive black iron security gates of my property. The cool night breeze carried the faint sound of jazz music and laughter down the hill from the main reception lodge. I rested my hand against the cold metal bars, and looked out into the deep shadows of the public road that ran past my estate. The glowing copper lanterns lining my driveway provided a sharp boundary between the breathtaking wealth of my resort and the quiet darkness of the outside world. As my eyes adjusted to the shadows beyond the reach of the estate lights, I noticed a vehicle parked on the narrow shoulder of the road. It was not one of the sleek black town cars or imported luxury sedans that filled my valet lot. It was a run-down 10-year-old economy car with faded paint and a dented bumper. The engine was turned off, but the driver's side window was rolled halfway down. A solitary street lamp cast a pale flickering light across the windshield, illuminating the face of the person sitting behind the steering wheel. It was my mother. Patricia sat in the driver's seat, clutching the steering wheel with bare, trembling hands. She was not wearing a pristine white cashmere coat or an expensive diamond necklace. She was wearing a cheap synthetic winter jacket that looked thin and worn. Her posture, which had always been so rigid and imposing, was completely slumped. She looked incredibly old, thoroughly exhausted, and entirely stripped of the artificial superiority she had wielded like a weapon her entire life. She was staring up through the iron gates, her eyes fixed on the brilliant glowing glass pavilions of the luxury resort she had once called a pathetic dump. She was watching the grand opening of the daughter she had completely thrown away. I did not feel a sudden surge of anger. I did not feel the childish urge to march out past the gates and scream at her for all the years of emotional abuse. I did not want to gloat about my massive wealth or rub her face in the undeniable fact that her golden child was currently sitting in a federal holding cell. Gloating is a defense mechanism for people who still secretly crave validation from their abusers. I no longer needed a single ounce of validation from the broken, bitter woman sitting in that rusted car. I had already proven my worth to the only person who actually mattered, myself. Patricia saw me standing by the gate. I could see her posture shift in the pale streetlight. She leaned forward slightly, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. Perhaps in her delusional mind she thought I might feel a sudden twinge of familial pity. She might have hoped I would walk out into the cold street, open the passenger door, and invite her inside to share in the warmth and the multi-million-dollar success. She might have believed that blood ties would force me to offer her a plate of expensive food and a comfortable bed in one of my luxury suites, now that she had lost her sprawling suburban mansion. I did nothing of the sort. I simply stood on my side of the iron boundary and looked at her with absolute unwavering indifference. I looked at her the way one might look at a stranger passing by on the sidewalk. She was no longer my mother. She was no longer an authority figure or a source of terror. She was just a consequence of her own toxic choices. I turned my head slightly and caught the eye of my head security guard. He was standing a few yards away, in a tailored black suit, keeping a watchful eye on the perimeter. He saw me looking at the rundown car parked on the shoulder of the road. I gave him a simple, silent nod. The security guard stepped forward and pressed a button on the heavy control panel mounted to the stone pillar. The massive iron gates began to move. The hidden motors hummed quietly in the night air as the two heavy black panels slid smoothly toward the center of the driveway. Patricia watched the gates moving. She did not start the engine of her car. She did not call out my name. She simply sat there in the cold shadows and watched the final physical barrier close between us. The two iron gates met in the center with a heavy, definitive metallic click. The automated locking mechanism engaged, sealing the perimeter completely. I had literally and metaphorically shut Patricia out of my life forever. I took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. I turned my back on the dark road and began walking slowly up the long, illuminated gravel driveway. The sounds of clinking champagne glasses and joyous celebration grew louder with every single step I took toward my breathtaking resort. I looked at the incredible architectural structures I had designed, funded, and built from the ground up. The custom infinity pool reflected the bright stars above, and the glass pavilions glowed with the energy of hundreds of successful people who genuinely respected my work. Donovan was waiting for me at the top of the stone steps. He held out a fresh glass of vintage champagne. I took it with a steady hand and offered him a genuine, peaceful smile. We walked back into the main reception lodge together, stepping into the warmth and the vibrant energy of the grand opening. I thought about the terrified, exhausted young woman who had been forced to drop out of college 10 years ago. I thought about the grueling days spent covered in drywall dust, saving every penny, and teaching myself the ruthless mechanics of commercial real estate. My family had treated my existence as an unfortunate burden. They had used my youth to fund their arrogance, and when they finally drained every resource they could find, they tried to bury me under a mountain of forged documents and fraudulent debts. They expected me to surrender and fade into absolute obscurity. But blood does not make a family. Respect does. They tried to leave me in the ruins, but they forgot one crucial thing. I am a developer. Give me ruins, and I will build an empire. The greatest lesson learned from Caroline is that true power does not come from family entitlement or seeking approval from those who actively tear you down. When her mother and brother tried to leave her in the dirt, Caroline did not cry or beg for mercy. Instead, she used their cruelty as fuel to quietly build an untouchable empire. This story teaches us that when toxic people attempt to bury us, we must become the architects of our own salvation. Silence and strategy are always louder than arrogance. Share your own personal experiences with toxic family dynamics and comment below.